if you think about the different stages, I mean, to me, like I think about like market fit is about adoption. I mean, you want people to start like whatever adoption means for your product, right? I mean, you just want to start use them and like be happy and recommend them and see like those growth loops, to use your terminology. And then it becomes about like how much can we actually expand this value prop? And this becomes like the scaling part of the first phase. And what I also seen in the last phase that you were describing, I mean, when you are already scaling, that you have those network effects, you are generating a lot of money, then it becomes more about how can you actually innovate.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Dara, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product, growth, and senior leadership topics. Good morning, everyone. Today we talk with a product leader known for her transformative approach in scaling digital products and driving sustainable growth. With over a decade of experience in product, she was guiding products from startup to successful IPOs. For instance, Hemnet, the place where you go and sell houses in Sweden. She excels in developing clear product strategies rooted in user needs, establishing robust product organizations, and coaching teams to deliver significant user and business value. Today, she is a solopreneur, ensuring that companies not only set visionary goals, but also achieve them through customer-centric strategic actions and not just blah, blah. But right now, she's spilling the tea with me, and I'm very excited to talk to her about it. Welcome to the Product Tea, Francesca Cortesi. How are you doing this morning?
Hello, thank you for having me, Leah. And I actually I'm gonna use that so the company do not just do the blah, blah. That's exactly what I'm trying to do.
Okay, cool. So this is something that we should probably put on a merchandise, like let's do less blah, blah and more ARR. I don't know. This doesn't rhyme. Okay, this is bad. Okay, anyways, Francesca, can you introduce yourself in a couple of sentences in case I forgot something, or was this good enough for an IPO?
I mean, that was an amazing intro. I just want to add like more on a personal note, maybe. Originally from Italy, moved to Sweden 2011. Two crazy things about me is that I can speak 5 languages, and many times happens right now that I mix them. So I start with one, and then like if my brain is really foggy, I continue with the other and no one can understand me anymore. So, if I'm tired, if I start with English and then I put the Swedish and then the Italian words, and then if I try to speak French, the Portuguese come out, it's a mess in my head. And then the other one is that I don't like chocolate. And I don't know, I never liked it. I feel that I have to justify myself. I just don't. Just fun facts, we're not only work, we are also people. So that's what I wanted to add in the intro.
Of course, you are right now insulting my genetic heritage as a Swiss person.
I know.
So
sorry, I'm really sorry about that. It's not personal.
No, it's fine. It's okay. We're not going to go and dive into that. I will just accept it as a fact of life, which is okay. But before we talk less about chocolate and more about startups, what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
It's an extremely difficult question. I think one of the most difficult that someone asked me. And I think at the beginning, especially at work, they think that I'm like, the impression that I give is that I'm really organized, strategy and things, and I have meetings and I have structure and all of that. But when you get to know me more, you realize that I have like this Italian thing in me, that I can get really passionate. And sometimes I can throw like all the plans that we have made like off the window just because there's something that is not so thought through, but it feels right. And I've learned that it's okay. And that's what I do sometimes. So it's like, I'm not so organized after all.
I think this is a very good point as well. I actually talked about this yesterday with someone where we were just like, with more experience, I started to realize that acting on a feeling is sometimes very, very, very important, even if you have not the data yet, especially if you don't have the data yet. And I think seniority just means sometimes that you're just not scared anymore to just act on it, right? Like you're not waiting for too long for the things to just kind of burn down.
Yeah. And maybe like for me, it's what you also don't do, or I don't do in those situations, is I don't go through exactly all the consequences that this could get. So it's not all the data, but maybe you don't talk with all the customer, you don't think about all the relationship, you don't do this, you don't do that. If it just sometimes, I mean, you don't have to do it all the time, but sometimes if it feels right. Yeah, some people call it product sense. To me, is like maybe common sense sometimes. It's just the guts of doing it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, and specifically like this organizational thinking of like only things that you can measure are good is false. I think what you can measure, you should measure. That's if it's meaningful, of course.
Yeah.
But if you think that good data always wins over having no data, that's also not a true statement, because sometimes, you just look at something and you just know that, okay, look, I mean, this is 100% just wrong. Having said that, we're often also very wrong in our assumptions and what we think is going to be. That's why we have A/B experimentation to prove specific optimizations at least. But I think specifically for bigger throws where you risk something for the business as well, you're just not going to get the data. It's just not going to happen. So sometimes to be Italian in this way, just to
throw all things up.
that's exactly the correct way. I subscribe to the Italian way as well, but we're not going to talking about Italy, not going to talk about chocolate. Today, we're going to talk about the transition of stages in companies, right? So like you've been with Hemnet. Can you give us a little bit of context on like, what are we talking about here in terms of scale? How big is this thing? Just give us a rough kind of overview on like what this is about.
Yeah, and I think Hemnet is a specifically interesting case, and I'm going to give a little bit of a background, because if you're not Swedish, you probably want to know what Hemnet is. And Hemnet is one of the biggest websites in Sweden, actually. It's like top 5 most used app. So it's like really like a big impact in the country. And it's the place where you go when you want to buy or sell a house. And normally there is one Hemnet for every country. Like in Switzerland, you probably have ImmoScout. And then in the UK, there's Rightmove. And in Italy, there's Immobiliare. Like, they're a place where you go. But in Sweden, Hemnet is also like a household name. It's as in Italy, you would say Ferrari. Everyone knows about it. Everyone has the app. Everyone loves it. So that's like the brand Hemnet. And if you think about the company Hemnet, when I started there, Hemnet has been around for many, many years. It was founded like 20 years ago, which is basically dinosaurs' time if you think about digital product development. It was founded the year when the internet came to Sweden. So like really, really long ago. But it was not run as a product company for many, many years until in 2017, it was acquired by risk capitalists who saw a big potential about it. So what happened is that the company basically became another company. So from a company that was created from the broker to the broker, not really thinking about scaling or anything like that. Risk capitalists came in, a new management came in. Company was around 70 people when I started, which was beginning on 2019. And it was turnover of around 500 million Swedish kronor. You divide it by 10 and you get the euros, just to get an idea. And then what happened is I would define that a little bit as a startup. Like not startup in the way that Hemnet needed to find funding, because the company has always been profitable, has already had the brand, has already had the traffic and all that part, but it didn't have market fit to expand the portfolio, which was the old thing about like scaling up. So we did that. And in 2021, the company IPO'd and kept on growing, and it was growing sustainably. So that's also something that I think it's important to put things into perspective. It's like growth, sustainability, and margins. So it's like those were the 3 most important things. And when I left it, which was like some months ago after the summer, the company is around 170 people. And the turnover that is public, it's the one of the end of 2023, which is 1 billion Swedish kronor. So basically like double the people, double the turnover, increase the profitability. And you were talking about company stages. In these 5 years when I was there, I think I've seen at least 3 different companies going from pre-market fit of those products that we didn't have, scaling up and getting in those network effects. Then IPO became more about maybe also more predictability, if you wish, like considering that you have all this quarterly report and such, but still with growth in mind. And that's pretty much then when I realized, also talking about being in those different growth stages, that the next growth stage that will be coming from Hemnet was not the one that I enjoyed. And that's the reason why I left. I'm much more comfortable and liking post-market fit and scaling up than what comes after. So yeah, in a nutshell, I've seen a lot of things in one single company. It was a lot of fun.
I think that's a very good summary. And I like this so much. Let's start at the end of it, of what you just said. I had a discussion with a friend last week that said that I don't think there's a company that exists that had an IPO or is at a specific size that is fun. I've just never seen one. So he probably subscribes to what you just said. But I think the takeaway from this as well, and this is probably also the topic that we're talking about, is that writing down the numbers is relatively easy. Like going from 5 to 50 to 100 is done very, very fast. But I think going through these different stages, like how something feels and how it fundamentally changes with how the people work, most of all, right? So like the product organization, while you're also trying to defend everything, is a very interesting conversation in itself.
Can I just add one thing? Because I mean, what your friend said is like, it's true. I would say that is also, I mean, it depends on what you think is fun. I mean, the main takeaway for me is that you as a person, as a product person or any person working in a company need to understand what you like and also realize that different company phases needs a lot of different skills and your job will become another job. And if you don't like it, it's okay. You know, it's not that you're wrong in a way. It's just that doesn't match like what is needed anymore.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's very valuable if you know your optimal place, because I think that's where you also can have fun. And if you have fun, then you're probably also good at your job. I would, I would go that far. So having said that, if we think about these three stages, and commonly they are, where we are pre-product market fit, where, the company is very, very small. There's a lot of companies that are in there and so forth. And then we start to go a little bit into my area, which is more like the VC area. So you have some funding, you have some revenue. Typically, I don't know, like at least most of the clients that I speak with are past like 5 million, maybe 10 million and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Post product market fit, where you start to think about, most of these are not bootstrapped. So they have some kind of investors hanging somewhere. You mentioned three things before. You said growth, sustainability, and margins. And then the relatively newer world for me is more like the PE side, or like private equity, where they have their fingers in the more mature deals, the Hemnet world, where we start to look at stuff after like 50 million in revenue, 100 million in revenue. And those are wildly different. Let's just start maybe at the very basics in terms of if we're looking out from the outside into these company buildings. And I'm going to give you a very short example on how I look at these, or like how I would evaluate performance in each one of these, because revenue is always relevant, of course, in all of these. But specifically when we talk about product market fit, and once someone has reached a specific amount of proof in the market that the product is being bought, then it's oftentimes about growth in terms of right? Like, so even people would say on LinkedIn, like, growth is not the most important thing. It's all about profitability. That is true. But for early stage companies, you still want to prove that an investor has a chance of...
That's the potential.
Exactly. That it has the potential, and for this you need growth. There's just no question around it.
Yeah.
So what do we talk about? We talk about some growth with some capital efficiency behind it, of course, but it's mostly about proving that you can scale fast, or like that you can grow fast at least. And when we now talk about the later stage stuff, then it becomes more about EBITDA, right? This is the stuff that they love, right? Like we talk about gross margins. We talk about how much money do you spend per dollar that you're gaining on the top? How optimized is your business and so forth? And this move alone is already very, very hard for a lot of founders, leadership teams, and consequently the organizations. Is this also something that you were part of, or like that you also noticed, in the sense of like you also had to shift a little bit your thinking on how you have to take this into the business?
For sure. And I also want to add, like, if you think about the different stages, I mean, to me, like, I think about like market fit is about adoption. I mean, you want people to start like whatever adoption means for your product, right? I mean, you just want to start use them and like be happy and recommend them and see like those growth loops, to use your terminology. And then it becomes about like how much can we actually expand this value prop? And this becomes like the scaling part of the first phase. And what I also seen in the last phase that you were describing, I mean, when you are already scaling, that you have those network effects, you are generating a lot of money, then it becomes more about how can you actually innovate? So the question that you get a lot is like, oh, you're like, Hemnet has been always really successful. I mean, since IPO, we had like targets 15-20% growth with at least 50% margin. We delivered and over-delivered on those every single quarter. So, I mean, we were growing, obviously. And the question that came back and back was like, how can you innovate? How much growth is more here? Where are you going to tap into like this new potential? So in a way, like what needs to come into the organization is growth is always going to be expected in a way or another. I mean, that's like what you have to deliver, especially if you are a public company and especially if your goals are around growth. Like, if you're basically selling like to those investor, in lack of better words, a dream, that now you like have a share that is like worth €5 and I can grow so much in this, and that, then it can become €500. And then they start thinking about, okay, but how do you do it? That's the mindset that you need to have as a product leader, as a product organization, that what brought you to the first market fit and to the first scale will not bring you to the other phase that is like innovation. You need, maybe what I've seen is like in the very first beginning for us it was not product market fit of the company, because the company obviously had market fit, but we needed to grow by creating a product market fit of a new product set. So that's also like many companies, right? Product market fit is not only on a company level, it can also be on a product portfolio level. And when the product portfolio is the one that is supposed to drive all the growth, that's where like it becomes important. And there, for example, the organization that I put in place to actually deliver on that was geared towards all hands on deck. It was also a little bit, we talked about data at the beginning, it was creating an hypothesis on one we actually needed to validate. And because that thing was so important that we had like, everyone thinking about it, talking about it, it's like sprinkling a bit of micromanaging about it. It's like, you really need to deliver this, because if we don't, then we that invested in the company are not happy with what we invested in. So that is about executing the shit out of it. So you need the org and the OKRs or whatever, like steering things that you use to go through it. So that's the first thing. Then for us, when we went through it, and that requires talking about like relationship, that requires the org, but that requires the mindset. That requires that we say, like, we put on hold a lot of things. That is really scary. It needs a conversation about alignment, and also like being really clear that actually delivering on that one goal is the most important thing. And this is the stage for many startups that I've also been working with, that you need. Sometimes when I see that they don't succeed, is either because they haven't validated externally or because they don't dare to double down on it. They like go a little bit spread too thin. So that's, you have like the first growth, like you have that. And then for us, it was like when that growth came into place, the org was in place, then it became like to take the next step. It was from super duper focus to make things in parallel. Then we needed another kind of org. We needed to rethink how we, created our product strategy. We needed to put like new product teams in place. We also needed to have a conversation about what are the levers that we have in the business to make sure that this portfolio of products that we created and are working, people are buying, actually grow even more. And then it became maybe not that much about new features. It became a combination of obviously product development and feature and value delivery, but also how do you, from a business perspective, leverage that? We worked a lot with how do we create pricing that is like aligned, it's ROI pricing, not just one price fits all that we had at the beginning. How do we work with the business model so the interests are aligned, so that, but Hemnet is also interesting because a B2B2C. So you have a broker in between. So how do you align the interest with the broker who also have in their own interests other things? So there is a lot of like thinking behind the feature, and also putting the organizational go-to-market and all like the sales and the customer support and the marketing became much more important than when it was at the beginning. So at the beginning, it was more like, if you think, okay, this is it, we're going to put all hands on deck. We're going to kind of like maybe not think about too much about consequences, like of all the consequences, because this is the most important thing. So we did it. And then when we were on the other side, then other things, as normally happens with scale, came our way. So it was not so easy to go so fast. We didn't want to, go through with so many things. And this switched completely the mindset. And it's not so easy to understand that you need to switch mindset while you are in the midst of it, right? So, you're so used to something that works, your tendency is like to continue with it. So it's like building it some kind of, reflection moment, at least, in lack of better words, like that is not only like OKRs, but it's really, what do we need? What is important for the company? And do we have the right people, structures, strategy that can help us? Really long answer I gave you.
Let's look at this a little bit more in detail, because what you just said, I think, is a very good hook on this. So you said that, some people just keep continuing doing what got them to that particular point. And I think it's important to also say why that does not work. Because you could say that, well, okay, I mean, if you have the same input, you should have the same output again. And that's kind of a reasonable thing. I think there's two reasons for this. The first one is, with scale and existing revenue, you have this very important function inside of the company of you need to defend existing revenue. So whatever you do has now a potential to destroy value. And the more customers you have, the bigger the destruction is if you destroy 5% of your value, right? So this is now starting to pull on every idea that you have that is giving you, I don't know, whatever, like if you make 10 million, then it matters whether you're going to destroy 5% of a $100 million company or of a $10 million company. So the business case changes without the idea changing in the first place. So that's the first thing. And I think this is kind of obvious to most founders, but I think we also have to understand from the outside that for founders, this is very, very difficult because they are still the ones that are having to bear the consequences if something like this goes wrong. And you said a couple of interesting things in there. I would probably reframe them a little bit into a statement that we could print on LinkedIn just to piss some people off. So the first one is, I think the dangers for scaling companies after product market fit and why they cannot get to the next stage is coming from two corners. It's coming from the CFO and one of them is coming from the CPO. Let me elaborate. After getting your first investor on the board, which is usually after product market fit, let's say your Series A, Series B, you start to have a CFO. And what CFOs do is they give you visibility into the business on a very important financial perspective that a lot of businesses, sometimes in a comical way, do not have. I can speak from experience that sometimes you know how much money is in the bank, but you do not know at what efficiency, like what your CAC is and so forth. So you start to get financial metrics. And then we start to optimize our financials. For instance, we could say, Francesca, we have a product team that has 40 people in it. Why do we not ship them to another country? We could save this and this much cost. And this is very, very dangerous. I'm not saying you should not do it, but it's very dangerous because we're starting to optimize specific cost structures when you really shouldn't. Sometimes, right? So specifically on personnel, I have a very strong conviction that most of the mistakes are starting on a product organizational level, driven by financial ideas, where you're like, oh, we're now the big boys, right? Like we're scaling, we need to optimize cost. But when you do it on people, you start to introduce budgets in terms of oh, we cannot hire more than this particular salary number, right? Like we could cut some costs there, just 5%, 10% over here. You start to hire less talents. It's a very kind of slow kind of erosion, right? So the head count goes up and up and up and up for less cost per individual person. And then you're starting to have a problem. And the second one is coming from the corner of the CPO. You said this as well. This was the biggest surprise for me when I started to work with companies at scale. And I saw this all the time. In 90% of the companies, alignment is getting fucked up once you start to become bigger. And alignment means exactly what you said. It's just having the same idea on what we are doing here, actually. And I think this is where most people fail because they do not know how to align people at scale. This requires a very specific skill set, and it doesn't work anymore. What worked at 10 people, where you can just stand in a room and everybody's passionate. We have usually probably one customer that we can focus on, but now we have probably 3 or 4. The North Star is shit. The OKR planning is just something that you go to every 2 to 3 months. Nobody's really aligned anymore. And I think this is how I'm thinking about it. Maybe I should write an article about this, why it's the CPO and CFO's fault, why you cannot scale anymore.
Can I add 2 angles to what you said? Because on the CFO side, I've worked with, Hemnet is obviously a success case, but I've also worked with company when it failed on different stages of scaling, which is also interesting to think about. What also happens is on the CFO side, or I would say CEO side or board side or investor side, anyone that has that money as first thinking, it's that when you have market fit, the very first thing is that, okay, what is your TAM? How much more can we get? Where is this big money, right? And when that happens, many companies start to one, what I've seen is like, okay, we have all these things. I mean, we're painting this big picture. The big picture is built on super differentiating themselves. So either like you're a B2B and you start thinking about, oh, we had this, and that. Or like you're B2C and you're like, oh, we're expanding in a new country. We're like taking this new target group, et cetera, et cetera. And then you hire a bunch of people because obviously you cannot do it, but you don't have the structure. And I mean, you start like diluting your value proposition when you do that. So, I mean, in that chase of those like big money or big TAM or big numbers on a slide, then you lose yourself. So that's something that I've seen. And on the product side, I would say that I agree on the fact that especially there are different talents and different competencies from going to 0 to 1, from 1 to 100, and then from 100 to 1,000 or whatever that is. And for example, I am not amazing at 0 to 1. I mean, I've done that, but I mean, I can do it, but I mean, that's not my passion. I mean, you need to constantly pivot. And I mean, that's like, we're talking about my structure. I mean, that's not really where I'm good at. I'm more good on the other side. And that's when you cannot shoot from the hip anymore. You cannot imagine product that you've been like, oh, I'm changing my product all the time because I'm pivoting until like I find the right market fit, until I find the right customer, until they find like the right monetization. Like that's what I'm good at. And then I have to scale it. And then I keep on changing my product for my customer. They're going to go bananas. And I mean, they're not going to like that. And you cannot have your 10 people in a room. You need to talk about priorities. You need to have a product strategy. You need to have those extremely tough discussion of what you're not going to do.
Yep.
And this is the mess that I like to be in, like this scaling up that. And then you have the third part that is more about like in more mature product. It's not that much about thinking. I mean, it's always thinking new, but it's more like, how can you go from the core? And how can you tweak the core? And how can you take more from what you already have? And that is also not something that I super enjoy either. So it's like, I totally agree with you. And it's a matter of like also taking down your ego in a way, like a little bit like some product people think, I mean, they're good at everything and they should be doing everything and they should be taking all the decision, whatever. And what helped us in the first place will help us like for all the foreseeable future. That's not true. And sometimes it's hard to recognize that you're not good at things.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Except me, of course, and you.
Obviously, you're good at everything, Leah. We're not talking about you.
Especially good at forgetting things that I cannot do that well. Okay, so now we complained about all the things that could go wrong, which is probably, I think, more like a standard procedure for most podcasts. So let's become a little bit actionable in that sense. So how would you say, from your perspective, instead of having people go down this path of failure, right? And this is going to happen in some way or another, right? But like we can limit the damage that is being done when you are starting to scale. What are realistic expectations that someone should have? So for instance, in terms of, what should you commit to? Like, how long does this take? What are the things that I can avoid right now? So I'm not having this very famous problem of, oh, we hired too many people and now I need to find a way back to where we've been. And now we've lost like 2 years on the path, just like to learn what we were talking about.
Yeah, let's just can I say like the thing that everyone says in product? So we have it out. It depends. No, I'm joking. But it really depends also like what growth means to you. I mean, for me, when I work with growth is sustainable growth. I mean, I don't want to work with growth for the sake of it. Like, oh, you can work with growth and then hire a lot of people. And then if you have to cut costs down the line, then you can let them go and restructure. I mean, I'm thinking more about growth, like sustainability. How can we not think about people that work here as cost center, as you were describing, but they're actually like creating value into the company. So that's like the first, it depends. Like I'm thinking about this kind of mindset. And then the other thing that I'm thinking is it's hard to do it if you've never done it. One thing that I wish I've done sooner is asking for help. And it doesn't have to, it can be like someone external, but it can also be someone in your company and someone who has done in another company, someone in your network, one of your friends, whomever. That's also another mindset thing, but more than sustainability for me is you're good, right? Otherwise you will not be there, but it's also okay to ask for help. So those are the two like mindset things. And then when it comes to what can I actually think about, it obviously there are a lot of factors to factor in. To be successful depend on so many things and depends on, for example, how well aligned your management team is, how much money you have in the bank, how much risk are you willing to take or not, how big is your organization. It's important, like what factors are important, profitability or growth or EBITDA or whatever. I mean, there are a lot of things, but what I also notice is that you can have some mental model to help you guide you through those phases. And those are the ones that I am thinking about writing about. But I mean, what I've in my experience is like, for me, pre-market fit, like the mental model, like you can use always is focus. Because the most important thing for you is adoption and having a value prop and having customer that use your product and have this like growth loops of people recommending your product or coming back. I mean, that is like you get there by having your assumption validated externally so that you can have like put down your assumption, like concrete things, what needs to be true in order for us to actually succeed with our product. And then create a series of experiments on how you can actually talk with customers. I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated things. So you can go out and talk to customers. And if you get like validation on the track, then I would suggest to double down on it. So you actually create an organization that is geared for focus and for adoption. That would be like my first mental model. When you go to, then you're like, whoo, market fit, you know, that Titanic scene that you're like, I'm the king and queen of the world. Like now nothing can, you know, touch me. You want to avoid becoming the Titanic going down, like wrecking down. Instead, like what you have to switch gear into is post-market fit or scaling. To me, it's speed within control. So what needs to be in place, I want to use this word like more structure. That is the moment when I think a product strategy needs to come in, a product strategy that is formulated like a behavior or something that we want people to do, connected with revenue. How do we make money out of this? We're not only solving problem, we need to make money unless we are charity. And we put there like how do we make decision? Who's making decision? How do we prioritize? You were talking about those, OKRs. Probably how you run OKR for 10 people is not how you run OKR for 50, 60, 80 people. Think about the amount of hours, talking about the cost of the company. Maybe those are the costs you want to cut, not the one of the people. So like it's about creating the structures, your product principles, whatever fits your company. But I mean, you need structure to be able to delegate and to be able to have everyone rowing in the same direction, because you're not going to be able to talk with all the people that you have in front of you. And then the phase after, which is like, how do you innovate? To me, it's a lot about rethinking beyond the feature. So it's not about new all the time. That maybe was a lot in pre-market fit and somehow in scaling, but it's more like, how do we leverage better what we have? Example, if we have a product that is B2B or like has a sales department that has to sell it, are the incentives aligned? Are the incentives aligned with the clients? Like if we grow, do they grow? What do they get from them? Is like the market, the business model. That's also another thing. Is the business model still valuable? I was working on a company, e-commerce, for example, where at the beginning we thought we would cut the costs for shipping as a way of differentiating the company. That worked for a while because it was like cut shipping, which was obviously an economic hit, but betting on volumes, right? That worked for a while. But down the road, maybe 1.5 years, what we realized is that the volume were not so big. And that was not a differentiator. So why were we having it? So what we did, like we reintroduced the shipping, so like reviewed the business model once again and actually achieved profitability. So that's another thing. I mean, what served you well at some point in your journey is not necessarily serving you well down the line. So that's what you have to constantly rethink. So it's focus, structure, and like thinking a little bit beyond the feature. That's the 3 things that I would think about if you don't want to do a lot of mistakes, or you should do some mistakes, but maybe not so many that like company bankrupt or anything like that.
So yeah, that's always a good advice, I think. Don't go bankrupt. I think I subscribe to that.
I mean, I've been there, so I know how it is.
Me too. I have ran a couple of companies into the wall. Luckily, not the big ones. So just like before people just now switch off from this podcast, these were private companies for myself. So please be gentle. So I wanted to summarize this a little bit with my own words, and please just jump in if you feel like that any of this is wrong. But I think we're mostly aligned on how this works. So let's just frame this in a metaphor. To me, there is this moment where a company feels like it has won in the lottery. And that is when you find this product market fit. This is the first time where you start to have cash, right? Like your cash is it's faster than the people that you can hire. This very commonly, right? This way, like this is how this feels. And it usually happens like at least, between 2 to 3, maybe 4 years. For some companies, it takes longer, whatever. So there is this moment of where you start to feel like, oh, we won the lottery. And this is usually also coming together with a capital raise where you're just like, hey, now we can grow really big. We have investors that give us money. And the investment hypothesis is commonly like, is the money that an investor gives you making you faster in the market? Because otherwise you don't need the money. So we can grow sustainably for like this huge outcome and so forth. And this is this moment where most mistakes happen because you're exhausted from this phase from before, from talking to all of these investors, from getting like 50 to 100 no's, which is a reality. And you're excited on like what's going to come next, right? Like you're going out into the world. It's almost like you're 18, you move out of your parents' house and you're like, oh my God, everything is going to be so amazing. And then reality hits. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about before you move out the house, or like before you won in the lottery, it was about ideas. It was exactly what you said. It was about having the best ideas to find, the thing that kicks you out of the house, which is good. But afterwards, it becomes about a different skill, which is about process and organization. Realizing and understand how a construct has to look like. So the construct does in a smaller scale what you have been doing as a person inside the house, so we can grow. The ideas are worth nothing anymore. I mean, not nothing, but like, a lot of founders are starting to struggle with this problem because they think like, yeah, but it's still always about the product. And the problem is, it matters a lot whether an idea is coming from an ex-founder or like from an existing founder, because you have a title in the company. This is starting to create a lot of friction. You cannot just hire people who are executing on your ideas. It's just not working. Despite on what an Andrew Chesky is telling you for Airbnb and some other things. I have some very strong opinions about this founder mode bullshit and whatever they do, just like to justify their little dictatorship and so forth. But I think if you take away something, then it's always, when you have a high like this, and we all will have a high, remember there will be a time where you have to go in front of the board again and the numbers do not look that good, because that's the most likely outcome, even if you're coming after product market fit. So what you can do at that moment is make little promises that are not so much around like how much money you're going to make, but like what you are going to do, because this is the first time where you start to make promises about changes in your company that are tied to a project. Oh, we are going to change the way that data works. Oh, we're going to change something, and suddenly it starts to sound less about the customer and it's more about, like some internal things that you always wanted to fix, like, we're going to restructure the marketing message, or we're going to do this and that. And it starts to become less and less about the customer. And that's fine. But the problem is these ideas and restructures and promises that you make to the board, because they also want to be, they want to see some good ideas for the money that they invest, are going to haunt you afterwards when you start to notice that you do not know how to structure your company through this process that you also mentioned. And when it's time, and I want to quote you now, when it is time to accept that you have not seen how good looks like and you need help, you should be in a position where you can also take the help. So what I mean with this is, I come very often into companies where we have to work in the constraints of promises that have been made that make it incredibly hard to now change the company from the teams, from the structures, from the alignment, because they promised some projects somewhere, and now they are scared of saying, you know what, actually, we should not do that. This was not a good idea. And I think this is a very interesting dynamic that is so almost impossible to kind of teach. And if I have any regrets for most of the companies that I advised, specifically when I was earlier in my solopreneur career, then that I did not push harder for it. Like I said, like, you have to kill this. Yeah, but like, you cannot just come into the business and tell me that you have to kill this and that. I'm like,
that's why you hired me. Yeah.
yeah, but Francesca also said it, right? Like, it is very, very often about what are we not going to do that we did promise in the past. That's what focus is. Focus is not more ideas or less ideas. It's more stuff that you're not doing. And for this, you need ICPs, OKR processes, and so forth and so forth. Just wanted to add that. I think as a summary, I think everything that you said is exactly on point.
One thing that I would add, and I mean, here it comes my bias, obviously, like I'm a product person at heart. So I think that the product is always important in all the phases. The difference becomes that obviously, I mean, what you were describing is like a switch in mentality for founders as well. Because many times, like the founder at the beginning, pre-market fit is also the product person. And I've seen many founders that are not able to do that step when they cannot be and I mean, I hate this freaking founder mode. I mean, you cannot, how do you scale that if you're like taking all the decision? And that's not your job either. I mean, you should have like people and facilitate a discussion, right? And you should have processes so you have good balance. What I think it's important, and it's like in that next phase, is like one, like you leave the ego at the door, right? Like whoever you are. Two, it's like, yeah, you have to find, that's where processes and priorities and what's important comes in. You have to find a good balance of keeping your product interesting. So having that, super laser focus on the customer, but also you need to have the super laser focus on your company, because you will need to invest in data. You will need to invest in platform. You will need to invest in things that are costly, if you think about that as a cost, but do not have direct impact on bottom line. And those are the discussion, like how do we find like a good balance and what kind of compromises are we willing to take for one or the other. But I just want to make the point that I think that still that the product keeps on delivering and improving, it's important, because otherwise what will happen is that you bet that your market fit will continue.
Yeah.
And you maybe double down on infrastructure because you want to do AI or whatever you're thinking about. And then 1.5 year pass or 2 year pass, and then a competitor came in and took out your customers. So, I mean, there's always like, that is also the difficult part in making things parallel that we were talking about before. Like, how many things can you do in parallel? And there's always less than you wish to. And how do you set up so you pick the right one and you actually execute on those? So product.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to this, because you just mentioned that the product always stays important. In my kind of, I don't want to call it a framework, but like the way that I talk about this specifically after product market fit is that you need to develop an idea on what is your core product. Mm-hmm. So the things that are little to negotiate around when it comes to the customer. So for instance, I don't know, if you're a restaurant business, then it is the food. Whereas you also made a very good example on this one, like, hey, what is the expanded value? Like the optional value that might be changing around this, which would be like, how do we deliver the food? This can still be negotiated around, like we can change it fundamentally and so forth. And why is this important? Because the core product is really worked by product teams that optimize already, even already in that stage, they fine tune this. Whereas the expanded value, or like this, it can even be sometimes support or, a customer success or whatever comes afterwards, is something that you still highly experiment around. I think it's this added value, but it's also okay usually to cut off stuff in that area much, much faster than you would changing with the core product. But whatever you do on the additional stuff cannot disrupt the core product. And that is how I think about this. And I think that's where most founders really fail at that particular stage.
Yeah, totally agree. And that's like exactly one big pitfall, that you forget about your core product. You forget the reason why people were like choosing you, and you start like doing a bunch of other stuff, like all the super apps, or like, like I downloaded this app because I want to, I don't know, listen to music. And then like, it's like fixing my coffee as well. Like, why? Like you go like too broad, too thin, too fast, and then you lose your core. And that's when you lose your customers.
That is 100% correct. I know we have to wrap up, unfortunately, because we're running short on time. We never have time.
Exactly. Too many things.
Too many things to do, too many things that go wrong. But if I had one final question to you specifically, like, so you said that, Hemnet as well was like a B2B2C company, and I'm very passionate about the B2B2C market for some reason. I really like this. I find it very fascinating as well. I just wanted to add like one really weird tangent to this, and then you can also add one to this, is that don't forget that you're always designed for the customer of your customer in that case. If you cannot fulfill whatever that value is, you're just going to fail. And I think what this looks like is commonly that you're trying to oversell to the B part in your B2B, right? Like the intermediate thing, when it ultimately still matters way more that the B2C part is actually healthy and doing well. And this is also a very weird mistake that happens sometimes when they start to invest into like, oh, how can we sell our product better to the B part, which is sometimes actually exactly the wrong thing.
Totally agree. I mean, I also really like, I've worked with many different marketplaces where the B2B2C is like, you need the B, you need to C. Sometimes you need to focus more on the C. Sometimes you need to focus more on the B. But what also is a common mistake is that because your organizational structure, what happens is maybe you have a B2B team and then you have a B2C team. Then you basically like the B2B doubles down on what you think that B2B customer wants. And then the B2C thinks about the other like the C customers. But in the reality is like, it's a conversation between the two. So what you fall short is that you don't optimize for the entire user journey, exactly what you were talking about. And that's where mistakes happen, or like interests are not aligned, or the product doesn't work anymore.
And that's Conway's law. And then your product represents how your organization looks, and your customer doesn't care about that at all. And so neither does their customers. And then we're in the shit. So Francesca, is there anything else that you wanted to add? Do you want people to reach out to you? If so, where should they do that?
For sure. Reach out to me. I mean, I write a lot. I have my blog, which is my name, or you can reach out on LinkedIn. And if you're thinking like, which other mistakes can one make, just let me know. I love to share mistakes. I think there are not so many people that do it. Maybe we are too proud, or we can't, or NDA, whatever. But I will be happy to share mistakes so you don't have to make them.
Okay, that sounds great. If you want to share your failings with Francesca, then I highly recommend that you do. Thank you so much for coming to the Product Tea today. It was a fantastic conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Kabam! Thank you so much for listening to the Product Tea with Lea. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leatarin.com, which is leahtharin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.